If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and have fun.
I'm so excited and I just can't fight it. I'm about to puff, pass, and I like it.
Welcome to this week's episode of Puff Puff Pass. This week we have Erin Salie. She's a death care professional, licensed funeral director, and also a green burial advocate. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Erin Salie, funeral director. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So, tell me, what's the deal with the word mortician? Lovely, right? Wonderfully posed question. What's the deal?
So eloquent. I love it. What's the deal with mortician?
What's the deal?
The title. Yeah, it's so confusing. It confuses everyone. People are always like, everyone I meet, they're like, what do you do? And I say, I'm a funeral director. And then like, they immediately jump to like words like Undertaker or like mortician or something like that. And it's not that they're like wrong. But technically the modern term is funeral director, although it doesn't necessarily like cover all the bases. So that's super complicated. A funeral director, directs funerals, obviously. In some states, you have like standard dual license. So in some states, if you're a funeral director, you both meet with families and direct funerals and assist with, care of the deceased. So like embalming and things like that. And that's why you can call someone a funeral director, and it doesn't necessarily encompass all that they do. In some states, a funeral director is just somebody who meets with families and runs services. And in other states, they do both. But classic terms like mortician and undertaker kind of have, some would say, like a negative connotation. And I think that's why we've kind of cycled those terms out. Mortician just kind of sounds like, I think it gives people like the oogie boogies. Like, I think they don't like it. It creeps them out because the word mort is in it, and we don't like death. We don't like talking about it or thinking about it. I prefer, if you're gonna go with like a traditional term, I actually prefer undertaker. I think that's a really great way to describe what people in my field do. Like, we undertake things that people can't handle when they're processing grief. Like, that's what we do. We undertake that role and those responsibilities so that people can have some time to process. So yeah, terminology is complicated. It's always going to be confusing, and some people are always going to have different preferences, but that's kind of like the breakdown of it, I think.
See, okay, hear me out. I always thought,
I'm listening.
Oh, you gotta hear me out. I always thought,
I know what you're gonna say. I know what you go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay, that
I know.
That the funeral director was the man who came out and did the directing of funeral. That a mortician was a person who was essentially like the makeup artist for the deceased. And that an undertaker was the person who did the part of the work of like the grave digging, essentially. And that portion of it,
because they take someone under. That's what people always say. They're like, oh, like, you're gonna take me under. You're the Undertaker.
Right?
That's not where it comes from at all. But I totally get it. No, a funeral director can be someone who meets with families and directs funerals and or embalms, or they could technically just be someone who embalms. It depends on the state. So New York State, where I live, if you become a funeral director, you have to have an education and be tested to do both. So all of my exams and all of my schooling were about both. It's not like that in every state. And that's why, like I said, it doesn't necessarily encompass everything. But mortician is really just like an old term for funeral director that I think people were like, let's not call ourselves that anymore, because it kind of like creeps people out.
Yeah. It's kind of like a
Um,
beautician.
yeah, it's basically all the same thing. It's just we keep finding new ways to describe ourselves because people start having like these negative connotations, like associations with that title. So they don't want to be called that anymore. But actually, the term for someone who cosmetizes people who have passed away is deserologist.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
yeah,
I,
it's kind of, I don't want to say it's like new. I don't think it's necessarily a new term, but it's not super old either. But yeah, deserology is a certification of practice for caring for hair, nails, and makeups of decedents, which is what we call people who passed away.
that's wild. I mean, like, it's wild. Like, what an interesting job. Like, what did you do? Nails on Sheila. Like,
Yeah,
it's
nails.
just so weird. Um, so what inspired you to get into this career?
Um, oh Jesus, kind of a long, boring story.
It's okay. I'm here
um,
for it.
you're here for it. Good. All right. So I actually wanted to be a librarian. I wanted to be a librarian since I was pretty young, about 14.
That's so
Uh,
cool.
yeah, I think libraries are like these beautiful sacred spaces, and I
Hmm.
just wanted to be able to work in one.
I like that.
So I was going to school for it. You need a master's degree in information sciences, and library sciences. So I was going to school, and I was like one semester into this program that I had started, and I was just so miserable. Like I was really unhappy. So I was like, let me take some time off of school. So I left school, and I was like, I was working, just living my life, trying to figure out the whole adult thing. And kind of in the middle of all of that, my best friend passed away very suddenly. It was suicide. Which, if you're really at all familiar with grief counseling or grief therapy, or just the general idea of
Mm.
what the grief process is like, suicide there's like, I don't want to call it regular grief and then suicide, but
Mm.
there's very distinct aspects to surviving a suicide and being someone who has lost someone to suicide
Hmm.
that I was not at all aware of at the time.
Right.
Um, but it's kind of, I think what it really came down to was, I was kind of a weird kid. I don't want to call myself morbid, but very interested in death from kind of an early age. And
Hmm.
um like, no, I don't want to say comfortable with the idea, but it was, have you ever seen When Harry Met Sally? This is so
Yeah.
random. This is the best way I can describe it.
No,
Do you know
yeah.
when Billy Crystal's in the car with Meg Ryan, and he's like, I bet you never think about death. And he's got like this air about him, like
Oh,
he's so
yeah.
special because he always thinks about death and he's so deep.
Yeah.
That was me. I mean, it still kind of is. Like, I think I'm so special because I have this special relationship with death, which isn't true at all. But
Mm.
when my friend passed away, and I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that I knew absolutely nothing, A, about grief, B, about what death really was, and C, about what we as a society do, like our culture does to, kind of start to get over that grief and process it, and, how we memorialize people. I was standing in my closet, not I didn't know what a funeral was. And all this time I had spent thinking I was so special because I read Edgar Allan Poe when I was like 11. Like, it just, it shook me. I got
Right.
shook. so so I just I had a friend she was a funeral director, but she's primarily, we call her a care center specialist. She's an embalmer. And I talked to her a little bit about it, and she's like, I think you'd be a really good funeral director. So I started looking into programs, and I wound up at this great program in upstate New York, SUNY Canton. Highly recommend if anyone's interested in or thinking about becoming a funeral director. It's a great program. Um, and I just sort of fell in love with it. I started going to school and working part-time in a funeral home, and I just never stopped. What my friend said was it was the hardest thing you'd ever do, but also the most rewarding.
Mm.
And she's totally right. It definitely is.
That's really, I mean, like, this is fascinating.
I'm glad you're fascinated.
No, it is. I'm
I
like,
was scared it wasn't going to be interesting enough.
no, I mean, like, I'm interested in morbid things, but I don't know if I
Yeah.
could do it for a living, just because it's, to me, it's got a lot of grief attached to it.
For sure.
So
That's
how do
for
you,
sure.
yeah, how do you maintain mental clarity and emotional boundaries?
Well, I mean, sometimes you just don't.
Right.
Nobody's perfect. Like, there's definitely just a natural instinct to build walls. And the way we go about it is it's really hard to put your thumb on. It's tough to describe. I think the best way I could sort of give you an idea is more to describe like what that process is like. So when someone passes away, I mean, that's day to day for me. And I'm trying to think how other people, what their perspective of losing someone is like. And obviously it's just heartbreaking. Like, it's one of the worst things you're ever going to go through. And I know because I've been through that.
Right.
But when someone passes away, to me, it's like, it's Tuesday.
Right.
Not to sound heartless, but for the first little while of that process, for me, it's very much just, this person passed away, we're going to go get them, and then we'll call the family.
Right.
So we call the family, or whatever funeral director is up to bat, as we like to say.
Right.
We'll call the family, and until I meet with that family, that grief has no face for me, if that makes sense.
Right.
When I meet with them is kind of when, I don't want to say my heart breaks, but like I start to really, I build connections with people. And everybody's so different. I get families in who are just laughing because dad was 98 and he had a great sense of humor and he was ready to go. And then I get, women who are sobbing because they didn't know that their husband was going to pass away that morning, and they don't know what they're going to do without him. So every situation is different.
Right.
And I think the best way that I deal with it, my personal philosophy is that when families come in, they don't want to be babied. You'll meet a lot of funeral directors who are, oh, Mary Jo, this is terrible. And it is. And it's fine to talk to people like that a little bit. But I love making people laugh. That sounds so weird now that I'm saying it out loud. And I think that people who are experiencing loss appreciate when someone treats them like not like they're little kids,
Right.
Because that's what we tend to do to people who are experiencing grief. You sort of talk down to them and you like oversimplify things. But I like to make people laugh, and that gets me laughing, and then we know something bad's going on, but I think we all feel a little bit better.
Right.
I think I just rambled a little bit, and I don't know if
No,
it
I
addresses
get
your
it.
question.
No, you did. I understand it. See, years ago I worked in a flower shop, and we worked a lot with the local funeral home. So we would get a lot of phone calls, families would come in, and it would be like, someone's mother. I mean, this like girl I went to high school with passed away. Her whole family came in, and it's like, at the point I had been working there, I was desensitized. So it's not that like I don't care. It's not that these like I don't feel bad for the people, but it just didn't impact me in a way where I took on the emotion.
Right.
So it's like,
well, and I think, I think part of it too is, going back to like the term Undertaker, like my job is literally to do things that the family can't do because they're in so much pain. So it's almost like when I go into work every day, it's not like I turn my emotion off, but like, this is my job. And if I care for these people, which I do, I'm not going to get broken down by this grief that I'm almost like absorbing their grief. You know what I mean? Like, you can't let that get in the way, because the best thing you can do for them is to turn it off so you can do what they need you to do. Otherwise you just be bedridden all the time because you'd be so unhappy.
Right. Like an empath should not work in this position necessarily.
No.
I mean, like, I feel like someone who's like going to constantly take on the emotions of others, it's like run the opposite direction because
Don't do this. Well, the problem
right.
is I think these kinds of careers almost like attract people like that because empaths tend to be very caring people.
Right.
So it's
Which
like they
makes
want to
sense, yeah.
help. And then, I mean, I've never taken a Facebook quiz, so I guess I can't say for sure, but I've definitely been told that I'm like a little bit of an empath.
Right.
But you know, who really knows? I think it's normal to meet with people and once you get to know them a little bit, you do start to feel for them. And
Right.
but like I said, the best thing you can do is you have a job to do. You can't let their sadness affect you. So it's so complicated.
You know what it is? You're an empath with boundaries.
Every empath should be an empath with boundaries.
Yeah, but
That's
sometimes,
great.
yeah, some people need that growth still. And you see that.
For sure.
I've absolutely witnessed it. And I'm like, be stronger. So so what would you say a typical day on the job is like?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is what I talked about. So even though I've been educated and tested and performed both kind of sides of the coin, we call them like the front room, which would be like meeting families, running services, and then the back room would be like working in the back, embalming, dressing and casketing, cosmetizing. I do tend to work now that as you are in the industry a little bit longer, you start, in my experience, you tend to start working in the front room more, and that's definitely been the case with me. So my day definitely, it's so hit or miss. Like death doesn't sleep. You never know what you're going to get. But I get into work around 8:30, and usually I have a pretty good idea if I'm going to be seeing a family that day or not, just based on, did we get any calls last night? Do we have anything left over from yesterday? So most weeks I'll see one or two families. So I might come in and see a family at 10 a.m. or something like that, and so the rest of my day just about is going to be taken up by whatever that family decided. It's my job to make it happen. So if they want to have a service at the funeral home with a specific clergy, they want somebody cremated, I'm going to be trying to get the paperwork for cremation completed. The cemetery, are they going to bury ashes, or is it a person in a casket? Because that's definitely going to need to be buried. I'm going to call the cemetery and organize that, and call the clergy. Is it a church service? I got to call the church. So
I didn't know that you did all of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you think about, so other things people don't really think about, death certificates. It depends on your state. In our state, we use what's called EDRS, the electronic death record system. So I have to get in there and look up this person and see, did the death certificate get entered into the electronic system? If not, who's the doctor? What hospital did they pass at? So, and it's really, really complicated. If they pass in an ER, is the hospital responsible for putting the death certificate in the system? Well, the hospital says no. So who is the doctor? And I have to call that doctor, and the doctor's, at this hospital on Wednesdays and this hospital on Mondays and Thursdays. It's a nightmare.
I just had no clue. This is like insane.
It's a lot. I mean, not that, oh, woe is me, but there's so many checklists associated with so many things. Some things are so standard, like on every case, you're going to be filing a death certificate. On every case, you're going to be signing a contract with the family specifying what the charges are, what they're for, and when are they going to pay, things like that. Which is a whole nother conversation. Talking financials with grief-stricken people is probably one of the worst things ever. But it's, basically a family sits down with me and they say, this is what we want to do. And then the rest of the day, the next 2 days are just me getting that to happen. I had a friend once who compared it to being a wedding planner, but you had to plan a wedding in 3 days. And I think it's comparable. I've never been a wedding planner, but I would think there's a lot of
work, right? I would think that there's a lot of work.
A lot of work, a lot of organization.
Yeah. So you said you see about 2 families a week. Would you
Mhm.
consider yourself on call like all the time, or how do you take off?
Well, I'm really fortunate to I work for a fairly large organization.
Mm,
We're a 4 location funeral firm. We have, I want to say 8 directors. I'd have to count, but I think it's about 8. Last time I counted, I think it was 8. Um, so we have 4 locations, 8 funeral directors. All 4 locations do about 600 calls altogether a year, which is a pretty good number. It's not like whoa, but it's not very small either.
mhm,
But the nice thing about working with so many funeral directors is we do have an on-call schedule. I'm usually on, I would say 2 days a week, and every other weekend I'm like actually on call.
mhm,
So that's, the technicality of it. Like, am I on call all the time? Not in the sense that if somebody dies at 3 a.m., I have to go get them. If that
mhm.
happens, I'm only responsible for a couple of days a week and every other weekend.
Interesting.
Um, I do give my cell phone number out to pretty much every family I meet.
Mhm.
And I tell them if it's on the weekend or after hours, just use my cell phone number. I don't want you to have the hassle of getting the answering service.
Right.
So, I mean, I've gotten calls on vacation. I've gotten calls at 10 o'clock at night. I I was at the last month I was at the hairdresser's getting my roots done, and a woman called me that I had prearranged with like 2 months before because her mom had passed away. Like, I had tinfoil in my hair, and so like I said, technically I'm not on call 24/7. I do my best to always be available. Absolutely.
Oh, that's a good way to describe it. So, death is a touchy subject, and a lot of people carry the weight of fear associated with it. What peace of mind can you offer to people who are going through the loss of someone right now?
It's such a hard question to answer. um, well, I think it comes down to what people find comforting.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, if someone's experiencing grief, it's kind of like what is it exactly that's upsetting them. So when you start to dissect grief and loss and fear, I mean, it gets really murky. I know what I personally find very comforting is, the idea of like returning to the earth and my energy and my body being recycled. Like, to me, no matter what comes after in terms of my consciousness or my soul, that's very comforting to me. Not everybody thinks about it in those terms.
Mm,
Most people would rather hear she's in a better place.
yeah.
If you say that to someone, you might get smacked. Not really, but they might want to smack you. If you've ever like
Right.
experienced loss and you're not a terribly like Christian person, or even if you're just an atheist, or even if you're just like in this part of your grief where you're just like really, really angry, you
Right.
don't want to hear that.
Right.
So I don't I don't know about what I can offer in terms of like peace of mind. My I think it's easier to say things with actions rather than words. So
Very
I
true.
I ju- I just try to be there for people like as
Mm,
best as I can. And I think that offers peace of mind. I have had families say like, you made a terrible thing so much easier. And that's like the best compliment you can give a funeral director, because that's literally my whole job, is just to support and to
right.
make the worst experience of your life like a little bit less terrible. That's my whole job.
That's a
um
lot. That's a lot.
I think what always gets me when because I don't want to say I think about it all the time, but I think about it quite a bit, like how that's my job. And I do say it a lot to families when they tell me that. That's what I say, that's my job. And what always gets me is like, I really fight tooth and nail for like the tiniest win. It's not like my goal isn't to like fix everything. It's just to make a terrible thing like a little bit less awful. And
Yeah.
you run a mile to like get an inch, basically, is kind of how it sounds to me. But I do. I love it. And whatever peace of mind I can offer in terms of just being there for people is my goal. But ultimately for me, it's definitely like, you know, I think it's beautiful. The idea of like returning to the earth is just absolutely beautiful to me.
So can you tell me more about your natural services? Because I don't know anything about what a natural service is like versus a standard.
Sure. Well, you've been to funeral services before, right? Like, can you tell me what you've experienced at all?
So
If you've experienced, I don't want to assume.
Yeah, I mean, I've only experienced what would be like your standard Christian funeral service,
Right.
where you have the viewing and then pretty much immediately after the funeral, nice things are said. It's sad. There's a memorial kind of a thing, your standard service.
Right.
That's pretty much it. And then you watch them get buried and you usually throw a carnation on top. It's like the cherry.
Right.
It's the cherry.
It's the cherry on top. It's a carnation. That's so funny to like.
And then you all go back to your aunts for
accurate.
sandwiches.
Yeah, it's so universal. It's not down to the tiniest details exactly the same everywhere. Because if you're a funeral director and you went to a service in Oklahoma, you'd be like, wow, it's completely different from what I do. But like there's standards that are just there. And like we hand out flowers at every single graveside service, and we always have people put them on the caskets.
Right.
But I mean, the differences between like a standard service and like a natural or green burial, when you say them out loud, they sound very, very, or if you went to a service, it wouldn't seem like that different, but it feels different. It doesn't sound different, but it feels different. I mean, ultimately, if you were to break down the differences, so in a green service, there's a few rules, and they're built on the premise that this burial is going to be better for the environment than what we would call a conventional burial. And the way that you go about doing that is, one, there's no embalming, there's no injection of, I guess you could say, like harmful chemicals, formaldehyde, basically.
Right.
Whatever the casket is made out of should be completely biodegradable and preferably a sustainable material. So my favorite green burial casket provider is Passages, and most of their caskets are made out of bamboo and willow because they're very sustainable. They grow back just about as fast as you can cut them down. And they're biodegradable, and there's really no metal in the casket. They don't put like finishes with harmful chemicals to make the casket. You look at caskets, a funeral director, I don't want to say they get excited, but they get excited when you sell like a nice mahogany casket, and you're like, mahogany wood is like really, really rare. Where did that wood come from? It's bad for the environment. And then the third rule is that there's no vault. It's in it, and that's built on the idea that like the body shouldn't really be separated from the earth. The whole point of a green burial is that I want my body to decompose.
Right.
And people fight tooth and nail to prevent that from happening, which is unavoidable. Like,
and kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy.
It's weird.
Yeah.
I've had people be like, well, how long will mom last? Which is what a weird phrase.
Right? Norman Bates.
And the answer is totally different because it really depends on how well the embalming went, which can depend on how good the funeral director is or the state of the person when you're at the point when you're embalming them.
Right.
But what a weird question, because like, does it matter?
Right.
Eventually she's not going to be mom anymore. Like
right.
Does it matter if it's 10 years from now or 500 years from now? Like she's gonna decompose.
Right. Why wouldn't you want it quicker?
Right. Oh my goodness. Freaks me out thinking about all those people.
It's creepy.
Yeah. Like
little rubber mannequins. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Creepy.
So those are like, on paper, that's the difference between a natural burial and what we would call a conventional burial. The vibe at natural burials is very, very different. And I've thought about this so much, and I really don't know exactly how to describe it or why the vibe is so different. But
oh, so sorry.
No, okay, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. For some reason, I thought your sentence was ending.
Oh.
And that's why I was like, I was gonna be like, oh, question about that. Sorry.
Well, that's probably because it took like a really long pause, and dead air is not good for podcasts.
No.
I'm
It
trying
really
to think of a way
wasn't.
to describe it.
It's just like sometimes thoughts pop into my head as like you're sitting here telling me something. I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I ask her this before I forget.
Ask away. I'm here for it.
I was just gonna say, like, what's the cost difference between a green and a standard? Like, what is it more expensive? Would you say, or would you say it's comparable?
Oh, great question. Well, this is a lot like when families call me and they ask me like, how much is a funeral service? Like, that is the biggest question. I can't answer that without more specifics, but I would have to say, if generally speaking, you're going to spend less on a green burial, and it does depend on what you want to do. So say someone wanted a conventional burial, but they didn't want a service at the funeral home, and they didn't want embalming, but they do want a casket and a vault. That's probably going to be, depending on where you are, quite a bit of money. But it's not going to be as much as if you had a service at the church and you wanted a service at the funeral home too, and then you wanted these calling hours and you want like a really fancy casket. A green burial, most people who choose green burial only want a graveside service. Could you have a viewing at the funeral home? Yeah, sure. If you wanted to have like friends and family come and see them unembalmed, that's fine. If you wanted like the fanciest green burial casket on the planet, would that be comparable to someone who had, a very simple service and like a not so nice but not green casket? I mean, the short answer is I would say it's comparable, but it's much more likely that you're going to spend less on a green burial because you don't have to pay for a vault, and vaults tend to be quite expensive. They're usually like over $1,000 where I am. Weird. So
it's just it's just so weird. Like, now that I think about it, like I've never, I guess, really, I don't want to be embalmed. Like, I don't even really think about it. I'm like, I don't know, just burn me.
Yeah.
But it's just like weird to think that someone would want to be like
preserved and put in a box,
not even that, like a pretty box, right? Like, make sure
this
make box it the in the dirt box. Cute. Like, I want the cutest box. Like, does it make any sense?
It doesn't, but you know what? Neither does grief. And I don't judge people. Like, I really don't. If someone comes, I'm such a, like, I'm so into green burials, and I wish that everyone would get a green burial. But when someone comes in and they're like, we want mom embalmed, we want to see her, we want this, it's very similar to that whole emotional baggage thing. My opinions are not my opinions anymore. I shut them off. I'm a funeral director. What do you need? I will do it.
Right.
So even though I'm all about green burials, I wish that everyone would have one. Like, that's not what I do. I'm never going to push anyone to do something they don't want to do, whether it's a green burial person who wants, a green burial, and I'm a funeral director, might try to talk them into, no, you really need to have embalming. Similarly, I'm never going to try to talk a family who wants embalming into having a green burial, because that's not what they need.
That's interesting too, because it's like, well, it all makes sense, but it's like these, like, you really, it's such a big job. It is.
Yeah,
it's
I certain aspects of it are, I guess. I don't look at it that way. Like, to me, I'm just like, like,
right. Well, you're like
how
totally,
can I help?
you're very professional about it, and you're just like, you're in. So are you also the makeup artist for the deceased, or what is that process like?
Oh yeah. So I get asked this actually quite a bit, and it surprises me because I don't really think that people think about it, but I guess they do.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I don't know how a lot of other funeral homes work. I really only worked at the funeral home that I'm at. Like, this is where I started working when I was thinking about going to school, and I just never left because I love it so much. At our funeral home, we have someone who comes in and does hair, but we don't have anyone who comes in and does cosmetics. And so primarily, and in my experience, typically the funeral director does the makeup.
Mhm.
When I started, I took a real liking to it. Like, I love doing people's makeup. So for a really long time before I started taking on more in terms of seeing families, I did almost all of the cosmetics for just about every person who came into all 4 of our funeral homes.
Hmm.
Yeah, but so to answer your question, yeah, I am also, I mean, I wouldn't call myself a makeup artist. Like, to me, this might sound really bad. I have so much fun doing little
Right.
old ladies makeup.
Oh.
I absolutely, absolutely love it. I'm like, look at you,
Oh.
you're so pretty.
Oh.
So yeah, I think it's great. I really enjoy doing it. But I've kind of started passing the torch to our intern and some of the younger, more newly licensed funeral directors, and they're kind of getting to experience the joys of, making. I had a woman once. I don't think that this question deserves this, like, it doesn't need this long of an answer, but I'm going to
It's
give
all
it to
right.
you anyway.
That's
um, I I had this woman who hadn't seen her mother-in-law for a really long time, and she was actually a hairdresser. So she came in to do. She was from the South, and her mom had been in a nursing home for like quite a few years. She hadn't been to see her in like over a year, something like that. She was a hairdresser. She came in the day before the service to do her mother-in-law's hair. Um, and she was doing it, and I was sitting with her, just talking with her, because I know how some people feel about like being alone in a room with a dead body. It kind of freaks them out. So I was just talking to her, and she was telling me about her mother-in-law and how it'd been so long since she'd seen her, and how she doesn't look like she remembered her. And I asked her just a couple, like, I just kind of snuck a couple of questions, and they're like, oh, what did she look like? How'd she like her eyebrows and things like that. So after she left, I take a really long time with makeup, more so than a lot of people. I usually take about an hour.
Mhm.
And people who are listening to this are probably like, oh, you're one of those people who puts way too much makeup on. I don't think I am, but beside the point.
Hmm.
So I took even longer than I normally do to like do this woman's makeup exactly the way her daughter-in-law had sort of described it to me. And when she came in, she started crying, and she said, you gave me my mom back.
Oh.
Um, which I mean, depending on what angle you look at it from, is either like a really messed up thing to say,
No.
but it's a very sweet thing to say, and it was very much appreciated, because I had spent quite a while working on this woman and just trying to make her look the way that they wanted to remember her.
Hmm. Absolutely.
um and it was a really rewarding experience. Like, she hugged me and she cried. She's like, thank you so much, this is how I wanted to see her. So, and that's why I don't judge people for what they want to do, because everybody has their own thing that's going to make them feel better. And if that means seeing your mom the way that you remember her being, 15 years ago, like, if that's
Right.
what's going to help you get over this, not over it, but through this part of this loss, I'm gonna do it. Sign me up.
Right. Oh, that's sweet though. Like, it's like, I don't know. I've absolutely been to funerals where I'm like, that is not my aunt's hairstyle. They tried and
Yeah.
failed. And
Yeah,
then like
and
my
I'm definitely guilty of that too. Like, I've probably done something where, like, I put pink nail polish on a woman who hated pink. Like,
yeah,
I don't know if I did, but there's no way I get it right every single time.
right.
So it's hard.
So I know that you talked about losing your friend. How has becoming an Undertaker changed your viewpoints on death?
Um, well, I don't think that they've necessarily I think it depends on what aspect of death. So obviously it's opened my eyes in terms of what funerals are, because like I said, I didn't know what a funeral was. I didn't know what I was supposed to wear or what
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be expected to do. And obviously now I have a much deeper understanding of what goes into funerals and funeral services. But
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of death itself, I don't think my viewpoints have really changed that much. Maybe they've, expanded a little bit, but I still feel very much the way I do when I was a little kid, like reading like Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson stuff. I think and this is part of where my love for green burial comes from, and this idea of I want to decompose. I think death is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's obviously it's a terrible thing to experience the loss of someone, but there's just something so beautiful to me about humans being part of nature,
Mm-hmm.
and as much as we build these skyscrapers and drive around in our cars, our cars are driven by fossil fuels. We drive our cars on death.
Right.
So to me, death makes the world go round.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I do this job, the more I think about that, and the more that is confirmed for me. And it's such an awe-inspiring perspective to be so close to death and to see the effects,
Right.
both small and big. But
That's deep, right?
deep.
That is deep.
We're getting deep. We're
So,
getting deep in here.
so would you say makeup is your favorite part of the job, would you say? Or
Oh, I get asked this question a lot. And day-to-day like tasks, doing cosmetics is absolutely hands down my favorite thing to do. My favorite aspect of my job is definitely getting to meet people. Something about my energy when I'm like sitting down with a family is very different from my normal energy. I mean, obviously I'm a little bit of a spaz, but it's even more so in a meeting with a family. And I have no clue how I come off. And then afterwards, they'll be like, you made us feel so comfortable and calm, and you helped us so much. And I'm like, wow, that's what you took away from that? Because I thought I was just like rambling for like an hour and a half. So I'm glad I helped.
yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely meeting people and like hearing life stories. And in some ways, I'm like one of the last people that gets to know someone, because after you passed away, and then I meet with a family and I get to hear all about this person. And that is super, like, it's humbling and super rewarding for me.
Oh,
So that's my favorite aspect for sure.
that's really nice. So have you ever had any really weird requests? Like, I know I've read somebody that has wanted to be buried in their car.
Yeah, I actually see that stuff too. And I'm like, as a funeral director, I'm like, how would you pull that off? Like the logistics
Right.
of it are crazy. I've never had any requests like that. I mean, I've definitely had people ask me weird questions,
Mm-hmm.
but no, I think the things that people want, I mean, every funeral director is like, oh, they wanted a lock of hair. Like that's so woo. That's about as weird as it's gotten for me, where like I had to cut off a lock of someone's hair. And I've done that a few times. I don't actually think it's that weird. Like I totally get the perspective of the family of like a lock of hair, but there is something unusual about it.
Yeah.
I've done it a few times, but it still is like kind of strange to me. Again, not judging, just sort of like it's not a common request. I think it's happened to me like 5 or 6 times probably. But
I
in
can see
terms
that
of
happening.
wanting a lock of hair,
Yeah, weirdly. Like
yeah, that's exactly.
it's
It's like
very Victorian.
it is, and I love Victoria, and I love it so much. So that's why I'm kind of like, maybe I know they're not gonna like make beautiful Victorian hair. I know it's just gonna go in like a jewelry box or something. It's gonna sit there forever.
Right.
But yeah, there's just it, and that's what it is. Like you understand it, but it still feels like kind of strange.
Right. Like clipping. Here you go.
Yeah,
Here's
clipping,
clipping.
just a snippet. Yeah, but no, I really don't get a lot of weird requests. And I think my my line for weird requests is probably really different than someone who isn't in the field. Like I had a woman come in once and she was like, can I see him? And then like her sister-in-law was like, that's such a strange thing to ask. And like, it's not that we do that all the time.
It's like,
what
seems
some
like a
people think is
normal.
right. So what some people think is super strange is like totally commonplace to me. I did once have a woman bring a pair of pants in and she said to me, I know you don't normally put pants on people, but these are my mom's favorite pants. Can you please put them on? I'm like, you think we don't put pants on people? That's when I have like this moment of like, oh my God, no one has any idea about like anything that I do. Like they're just totally out there, just operating on their own imagination. So
that's why I'm here. I need to find the facts.
Yeah. And that's why I always say yes to podcasts, because I'm like, yes, ask the questions. I want to answer them, because I don't like when people are like, what do you do with the organs? Nothing. They're still in. Why would you think I take them out?
Right.
So I get a lot of strange questions like that, but strange requests, not so much.
Well, the Egyptians,
Yeah. Well, oddly enough, embalming techniques have really evolved over the last 3,000 years.
I would have never known. So, do you have any specific service that stands out as particularly poignant? Try to say that 3 times fast. Particularly poignant.
Particularly poignant.
Particularly poignant.
I always kind of rely on the families, like how they're acting, to tell me like how, I don't want to say how good of a job I did, but I definitely, when I'm out of service and a family is like really, they're getting to it, if you know what I mean, like they're feeling every service you organize, you're like, I hope this hits the family. Like it's terrible, but you want to make them cry. That's the goal, is to like help them process that grief as much as possible. So when you see a family being hit with that, that's to me particularly poignant. There are certain things that like hit me really hard.
Right.
One of them was actually just one experience, and it was a natural burial, and the family really wanted to see this person lowered into their grave. And normally we don't always lower people into the grave. I wait for the family to request it, because for some people it's like it's too much.
Yeah.
But when you do see someone lowered in the grave, you don't see them lowered into the grave. You see the casket lowered into the grave. This woman was in a shroud. So, and we had put like white roses on her, and they were playing Cohen's Hallelujah, and it had been like raining off and on, and the sun came out and it was like shining on the shroud and on these roses, but there was like water. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It hit me really hard.
Wow.
Yeah. And
it sounds like so beautifully sad.
Yeah, totally. And that's the shit I live for, is beautifully sad shit. Taps always gets me. I don't necessarily consider myself like a terribly like patriotic person in like traditional terms. But when you hear taps played and you watch them like fold the flag and like hand it to the closest living relative, there's something, you know what it is? It's always music tied in with some aspect of the service is always going to be like, ooh.
Yeah.
And we've done things like candle ceremonies where we have like the family members like come up and like light a candle. Balloon releases are incredible always. I don't necessarily agree with the environmental aspect of balloon releases, but they are absolutely gorgeous. And so I think anything a family does to make something very like personal, very unique to that person. If someone loved butterflies and you want to do a butterfly release like that, and you like play the ukulele Somewhere Over the Rainbow song while you do that, I'm gonna cry. I'm not gonna not cry.
I just like thinking of the whole scene set up.
Yeah.
was good. That was good. That was really good. Ukulele.
Yeah. You hear it, you go, the tears are coming. They're coming. They're streaming.
Yeah. So last but not least, where can our friends find you?
Definitely Instagram. That's probably my favorite social media of choice. Instagram, millennial_mortician. That's where you'll find me. And feel free to always send me a message. Like I said, I love questions and I love answering questions, and send me your questions.
That is amazing. And I'm going to send us out momentarily with your favorite Led Zeppelin song, which is...
Oh God, I knew you were gonna ask this, and like I thought about it, and now that you've asked me, it's so hard. Fool in the Rain. It's Fool in the Rain. That's my favorite Led Zeppelin song.
All right. That'll be it. That'll be it then, gal.
I know that was so final of you to say it like that. I was really hoping for like, oh, good stuff, and you were like, nope, that's it. You picked it. Hope you can live with the choice.
That's it for you, girl. Get back in your cage.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you. No. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I said good day, sir.
I had a lot of fun with you. You are a hoot.
I'm glad you think so. Thank you. It's a very similar experience when I meet with families and they're like, he's so great. And I'm like, really? Are you sure? That was nice. Thank you so much.
It was so much fun. And I feel like I learned a lot. I honestly didn't know that. I know that it was a responsible job, but I didn't know that there was so much entailed in the process. And it's like, I mean, good for you, because I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, you know, it definitely, obviously the first time you ever meet with a family, you're like, holy shit, how does anybody do this? And as you go forward, you get like a groove, you know, you get a process, and you don't screw up quite so much anymore. Not that you don't screw up at all, but it is a lot, and you start to get the handle on it, but it can still be super, super overwhelming. I think that's probably the case of any job though. So I don't think I'm particularly special or anything.
Oh, you're special.
Oh, I'm special.
Oh, you're special.
Yeah, I'm so special.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I can't wait to chat with you more again. Yeah, everybody needs to follow you on the Instagram, because we all need to be friends.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Yeah, can't wait. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. All right, bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I sure did. I really feel like I learned a ton I never knew before. Like, let's talk about brain crickles. Make sure you follow her at millennial_mortician. Be her friend. Please also like and subscribe and tell all of your friends. Let's all be friends.